you are aware. I refuse to be mistreated by her as my attorney. I'm shocked that she has a proposed trial date, considering the fact that I have not seen anything. I keep asking her for just a download of my phone or my medical records or for anything that I've asked pretty much all of the other attorneys as well.
What if a game turned deadly? A night of laughter, a suitcase, and a chilling video that would forever change lives. What really happened inside that Florida home? In February of 2020, in the quiet suburban town of Winter Park, Florida, an unimaginable tragedy unfolded behind closed doors. This wasn't just any peaceful night. It would be the last for Jorge Torres Jr. His life ended in a horrifying and bizarre sequence of events that would shock not only the local community but make headlines across the nation. At the center of this tragedy was Sarah Boone, a 42-year-old woman accused of causing the death of her boyfriend, Jorge. What started as a seemingly playful moment between the couple ended in devastating loss. Boone and Torres had been drinking, their night reportedly filled with laughter and games. But by morning, the lightheartedness had vanished, replaced with confusion, terror, and death. Winter Park, known for its picturesque streets and serene atmosphere, became the backdrop for this nightmare. A city that thrives on its calm, this small community was shaken when it was revealed that Torres, 42 years old and a father of three, had been zipped into a suitcase and left to suffocate. The crime seemed almost unfathomable, an act so senseless, with motives that felt muddied by years of a troubled relationship between the two. Behind the tragic end of Jorge Torres Jr.'s life lies a relationship marked by volatility, conflict, and violence. Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres were entangled in a complicated and turbulent relationship, one where the lines between love and pain became tragically blurred. By 2020, both Boone and Torres had experienced multiple run-ins with the law, many of which stemmed from incidents involving domestic violence. Torres, a father of three, had been arrested several times for assaulting Boone. These arrests painted a dark picture of their relationship, one marred by conflict and aggression. But the toxicity wasn't one-sided. In 2018, Boone herself was arrested and charged with battery by strangulation during one of their violent altercations. Both were charged after the incident, but Boone's charges were later dropped. The couple seemed to oscillate between moments of connection and episodes of extreme tension, their bond slowly unraveling with each fight and arrest. Friends and neighbors were no strangers to the disputes between Boone and Torres, and those who knew them recognized that their relationship was far from stable. There was love, sure, but it was accompanied by a disturbing pattern of physical and emotional abuse, misunderstandings, and mistrust. Despite the tumult, Boone reportedly bailed Torres out of jail after each arrest, a decision that likely deepened their destructive cycle. In the end, the tension between them culminated in that fateful night in Winter Park. A history of anger, unresolved trauma, and violence between the two laid the groundwork for what would be Torres's tragic final moments. As investigators later dug deeper into their relationship, it became clear that their issues ran far deeper than a simple lover's quarrel. They were entangled in a dark web of mutual violence, setting the stage for a devastating end. On the night of February 24th, 2020, Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres Jr. were in their Winter Park home, enjoying what seemed to be a normal evening of drinking. According to Boone's later statements, the two had shared a bottle of wine, and their night appeared to be filled with light-hearted fun. However, this seemingly innocent evening would soon spiral into tragedy. As the night wore on, Boone claimed that they decided to play a game of hide and seek. It was during this playful moment, she alleged, that Torres voluntarily got inside a suitcase. Boone described this as part of their laughter-filled game, with Torres willingly climbing into the suitcase as if it were a joke between the two. In her version of events, Boone saw nothing dangerous about it at the time. She stated that Torres believed he could easily escape whenever he wanted, and they both laughed at the situation. Boone then said that after Torres was inside the suitcase, she went upstairs to bed, assuming that he would free himself and follow her shortly. However, Boone admitted to falling asleep while Torres remained trapped inside the suitcase. When Boone woke up the next morning, she made a horrifying discovery: Torres was still inside the suitcase, unresponsive. What began as a night of playful drinking had taken a dark and deadly turn. In a panic, Boone dialed 911, claiming that her boyfriend was dead. The playful game had turned into something far more sinister, and Boone's version of events would soon be questioned by investigators. This was just the beginning of a case that would unravel the truth behind Torres's death and Boone's role in it. According to Sarah Boone's version of events, the suitcase incident began as part of a playful exchange between her and Jorge Torres Jr. Boone claimed that after a night of drinking, they were in high spirits, and in the midst of their game, Torres willingly got into the suitcase. Boone explained that they both laughed as she zipped him inside, making it seem like an innocent joke. She later stated that there was no malice or ill intent behind her actions and that the act was all in good fun. Boone insisted that she believed Torres could easily escape from the suitcase whenever he wanted. In her mind, this was nothing more than a continuation of their evening of games, a moment of humor shared between them. After zipping the suitcase, Boone alleged that she went upstairs to bed, leaving Torres behind. She claimed she did not think twice about it, assuming that at any moment Torres would unzip himself and follow her to bed. However, Boone stated that after going to bed, she fell asleep and remained unaware of the horrific events that would unfold. By the time she woke up the next morning, Torres was still inside the suitcase, unresponsive and motionless. It was at this point that Boone's night of playful interaction quickly turned into a nightmare. In her panic, she called 911, telling the dispatcher that her boyfriend was dead. While Boone initially painted this incident as a terrible accident, investigators found inconsistencies in her story. The videos recovered from Boone's phone told a much darker narrative, one where Torres begged for his life, pleading with Boone as she ignored his cries for help, laughing at his suffering. This stark contrast between Boone's version of events and the video evidence would later play a crucial role in the investigation and eventual charges against her. The morning after what Sarah Boone described as a night of playful drinking and games, she claims to have woken up to a grim and horrifying discovery. According to her account, as daylight broke on February 25, 2020, she found Jorge Torres Jr. still trapped inside the suitcase where he had spent the night. Boone stated that she immediately knew something was wrong when Torres didn't respond to her attempts to wake him. Boone recounted that as she unzipped the suitcase, she found Torres unresponsive. His body was stiff and his skin had turned a disturbing shade of purple, clear signs that he had been without oxygen for an extended period of time. Boone would later tell the authorities that she panicked upon seeing blood coming from Torres's mouth, a detail that added to the chilling nature of the scene. This was the moment she realized that the man she had spent the evening laughing with was no longer alive. Frantically, Boone called 911, describing to the dispatcher that her boyfriend was dead and that she had no idea how it had happened. Throughout the call, she claimed that the night before had been nothing more than a playful interaction gone tragically wrong. Boone insisted that she had fallen asleep, fully believing that Torres could have freed himself from the suitcase. However, the scene painted a different picture. Torres had died from asphyxiation, and by the time Boone discovered him, rigor mortis had set in, further proving that he had been in the suitcase for a prolonged period. Boone's initial shock and panic were evident in her emergency call, but it wasn't long before investigators began to question the details of her story, especially after finding damning video evidence on her phone. In the frantic moments after Sarah Boone discovered Jorge Torres Jr. unresponsive inside the suitcase, she dialed 911. During the call, Boone sounded panicked and breathless, struggling to explain the situation. She repeatedly told the operator, "My boyfriend is dead," her voice filled with shock and confusion. Boone conveyed a sense of urgency, describing Torres's condition: his body stiff, his lips blue, and blood coming from his mouth, clear indicators of something terribly wrong. Throughout the call, Boone attempted to explain how they had been playing hide and seek the night before, with Torres willingly climbing into the suitcase. She described their night as playful and casual, insisting that she hadn't meant for anything like this to happen. Boone claimed that she fell asleep and only discovered Torres's lifeless body the next morning. Her tone during the call was one of disbelief, as though she couldn't comprehend how the situation had escalated to this tragic point. Boone continued to reiterate that she had assumed Torres would be able to get out of the suitcase on his own. The horror in her voice seemed genuine, but as investigators would later uncover, the details she provided didn't align with the chilling video evidence found on her phone. What stood out in the call was Boone's insistence that it had been an accident, a game that went horribly wrong. Yet, the 911 operator, trained to remain calm, gathered as many details as possible while dispatching emergency responders to the scene. This call would later become a pivotal piece in understanding Boone's narrative, which would be further unraveled by the evidence. When law enforcement arrived at Sarah Boone's home on the morning of February 25, 2020, they were met with a disturbing scene. Jorge Torres Jr. was found unresponsive inside the suitcase, just as Boone had described in her frantic 911 call. His body showed clear signs of asphyxiation, with his lips blue and blood visible near his mouth. Boone, visibly shaken, initially appeared cooperative with the officers who arrived to investigate the mysterious circumstances surrounding Torres's death. From the beginning, Boone was willing to speak with the police, recounting the events of the previous night. She stuck to her story of an innocent game of hide and seek that had gone tragically wrong. Boone told investigators that after zipping Torres into the suitcase, she had gone upstairs, fallen asleep, and assumed he would get out on his own. Her tone remained one of confusion and disbelief as she described discovering Torres's lifeless body the next morning. As the investigation unfolded, Boone voluntarily handed over her phone to the police when they requested it. This gesture of cooperation seemed to reinforce her claim that she had nothing to hide. However, the content on the phone would soon unravel Boone's version of events. Investigators found two shocking videos recorded during the night, showing Torres begging for help while trapped inside the suitcase. Boone could be heard mocking him, laughing as he pleaded for his life, turning what she had framed as a playful accident into something far more sinister. The discovery of these videos drastically shifted the investigation. Law enforcement began to scrutinize Boone's account, noting the stark contrast between her claim of an innocent game and the chilling footage that suggested a more malicious intent. While Boone's initial cooperation helped move the investigation forward, the evidence retrieved from her phone would ultimately become central to the charges she faced. The investigation into Jorge Torres Jr.'s death took a dramatic turn when law enforcement discovered two disturbing videos on Sarah Boone's phone, recorded the night Torres was trapped in the suitcase. These videos, which directly contradicted Boone's initial story of a playful game gone wrong, revealed a far more chilling sequence of events. In the first video, Torres can be heard pleading for his life from inside the suitcase. His voice is panicked and desperate as he repeatedly cries out, "I can't breathe," and calls out Boone's name, begging her to let him out. Instead of helping him, Boone can be heard mocking Torres, responding with chilling indifference. At one point, she says, "That's what you do when you choke me," a statement that stunned investigators. The sound of Boone's laughter can be heard in the background as Torres continues to struggle for air. She even taunts him by saying, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me." The second video, which was much shorter, showed the suitcase facing a different direction. Torres's voice was weaker, still calling out Boone's name, but there was no response. The complete lack of empathy and her disregard for Torres's obvious distress painted a starkly different picture than Boone's initial claim that this was simply a playful moment that had gone tragically wrong. The videos made it clear that this was not an innocent game of hide and seek, but rather a moment where Boone intentionally ignored Torres's suffering. Investigators were deeply disturbed by the contrast between Boone's laughter and Torres's desperate pleas for help. This evidence quickly shifted the investigation from an accident to a potential act of malice, forming the foundation of the charges against Boone. The videos found on Sarah Boone's phone offered an unsettling glimpse into the final moments of Jorge Torres Jr.'s life. Far from the playful hide and seek narrative Boone initially described, these videos captured a disturbing sequence where Torres was not only pleading for help but being mocked and taunted by Boone while trapped in the suitcase. In the first video, Torres is heard gasping for air, his voice strained and filled with panic as he repeatedly tells Boone, "I can't breathe." His desperate cries reveal that he was fully aware of his deteriorating condition, and his pleas were clear indicators that he was suffocating inside the suitcase. As Torres begged for release, Boone's responses were chillingly indifferent. Instead of helping him, she can be heard laughing in the background. At one point, she uttered the shocking line, "That's what you do when you choke me." This statement appeared to reference a prior incident, possibly hinting at ongoing abuse in their relationship. Boone's remarks continued to take on a darker, more personal tone as she brought up past grievances, saying, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me." These words suggest a deeper emotional undercurrent to the situation, as Boone seemed to view Torres's suffering as some form of twisted retribution for perceived wrongs he had committed. Her laughter throughout the video only added to the cruelty of the moment, showing a complete disregard for the fact that Torres was in a life-threatening situation. In the second, shorter video, the suitcase was flipped to a different position, and Torres's voice had become weaker. He continued calling out Boone's name, but the urgency in his tone had faded, as if he were succumbing to the effects of asphyxiation. Boone, however, offered no response to his fading cries, further reinforcing the impression that she was fully aware of his suffering but chose to ignore it. The emotional and psychological impact of the videos is hard to overstate. Boone's taunts, laughter, and cruel remarks seemed to strip Torres of any hope for survival. The way she referenced past conflicts while deliberately ignoring his distress painted a picture of intentional cruelty, which ultimately shattered her claims of an innocent game gone wrong. This evidence became central to the case as it clearly demonstrated Boone's mindset during the incident, showing that she viewed Torres's suffering with a sense of cold indifference rather than concern. The autopsy of Jorge Torres Jr. provided critical insights into the horrifying details of his death. According to the medical examiner's report, Torres died from asphyxiation after being zipped inside the suitcase for an extended period of time. His body was found with clear signs of oxygen deprivation, a condition that occurs when breathing is restricted to the point where the body cannot get enough air to sustain life. The autopsy also revealed that Torres had suffered physical trauma consistent with having struggled inside the confined space of the suitcase. Bruises were found on various parts of his body, likely caused by his desperate attempts to free himself. There were no other significant injuries, which confirmed that his death was primarily caused by the lack of oxygen while trapped. The exact time Torres spent inside the suitcase before he succumbed to asphyxiation is difficult to pinpoint with absolute precision, but evidence from the video recordings and Boone's own statements suggests that he could have been trapped for several hours. Investigators believe that he may have been inside the suitcase for anywhere between several hours to possibly up to 12 hours. This prolonged period of entrapment ultimately led to his inability to breathe, as the space inside the suitcase was too confined for him to expand his lungs properly. This information, combined with the disturbing video evidence, painted a devastating picture of Torres's final moments. The autopsy confirmed what investigators had feared, that Torres had died slowly and painfully, suffocating while Boone ignored his cries for help. The forensic findings supported the charges of second-degree murder, showing that his death was not just an accident but a result of deliberate neglect. As the investigation into Jorge Torres Jr.'s death progressed, Sarah Boone's version of events began to shift significantly, especially after she was confronted with the damning video evidence found on her phone. Initially, Boone had maintained that the entire incident was a tragic accident born out of an innocent game of hide and seek with no intention of harm. She claimed that both she and Torres were in good spirits, laughing and drinking that night, and that she had fallen asleep, assuming he would easily free himself from the suitcase. However, when investigators showed Boone the two videos where Torres was pleading for his life while trapped inside the suitcase, her story began to change. Faced with this undeniable evidence, Boone appeared to become increasingly defensive. She initially stated that she didn't remember recording the videos, suggesting that she was too intoxicated to recall what had happened. This was one of the first signs that she was attempting to distance herself from the severity of her actions. Boone then shifted her explanation further, attempting to blame alcohol for her lack of judgment that night. She claimed that the alcohol impaired her ability to think clearly, insinuating that the entire event was influenced by the intoxicated state she found herself in. However, when pressed by investigators, Boone was inconsistent in her account of how much she had actually consumed, adding to the suspicion that she was trying to deflect responsibility. Her defense started to crumble as the investigators pointed out the emotional coldness captured in the videos, her mocking tone and laughter as Torres begged for help. Boone had no clear explanation for why she could be heard taunting him about past incidents of choking and cheating, nor could she provide a valid reason for why she didn't assist him when he was clearly in distress. The inconsistency in Boone's stories, along with her attempts to attribute the incident to alcohol, only deepened law enforcement's suspicions. Her shifting narrative, combined with the video evidence, painted a picture of someone who was not only aware of the suffering she caused, but also willing to change her account when confronted with the consequences. After the discovery of the chilling video evidence showing Jorge Torres Jr.'s final moments, Sarah Boone's arrest became inevitable. Law enforcement, already skeptical of Boone's initial story about an innocent game gone wrong, moved quickly to press charges once they reviewed the incriminating footage. The videos, which depicted Boone laughing and taunting Torres as he begged for help, starkly contrasted her earlier narrative and pointed to a more intentional act of cruelty. On February 25, 2020, after Boone had voluntarily handed over her phone to the police, the investigation shifted dramatically. What had started as a routine inquiry into an accidental death turned into a case with clear signs of negligence and possibly malice. The videos were the turning point, providing law enforcement with irrefutable evidence that Boone had not only ignored Torres's desperate cries for help, but also seemed to revel in his suffering. With this evidence in hand, Boone was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The charge reflected the belief that her actions were reckless and showed a depraved indifference to Torres's life, though not premeditated. Law enforcement handled Boone's arrest with precision, making sure to collect all necessary evidence from the scene and ensuring that Boone's shifting statements were documented carefully. Investigators worked to build a case that would not only rely on the disturbing video evidence, but also Boone's behavior, inconsistencies in her story, and the history of domestic violence between the couple. Following her arrest, Boone was taken into custody and held without bail. The arrest marked a critical step in the legal proceedings as Boone now faced the reality that her version of events would be dissected and scrutinized by both the court and the public. The shocking nature of the evidence made it clear that her actions could not be dismissed as a mere accident, and the charges of second-degree murder carried the weight of the consequences she would now face. As the legal proceedings began, Sarah Boone's case took a complex and chaotic turn, marked by several delays, multiple attorney changes, and shifts in her defense strategy. After her arrest in February 2020, Boone faced a second-degree murder charge for the death of Jorge Torres Jr., a charge that carries serious consequences. The early stages of her legal journey were anything but smooth as she cycled through numerous defense attorneys, each of whom either withdrew from the case or was dismissed by Boone herself. Boone's frustration with the legal process became evident as she struggled to maintain consistent legal representation. Over the course of the first few years following her arrest, she went through no fewer than 8 different defense attorneys. Each of these attorneys withdrew for various reasons, ranging from conflicts of interest to Boone's dissatisfaction with their defense strategies. At one point, Boone even wrote a letter to the judge, expressing her grievances about how her case was being handled, particularly her concerns about insufficient communication between herself and her attorneys. In January 2021, Boone made headlines when she claimed that she wasn't being represented fairly. She expressed a lack of confidence in the way her case was progressing, leading her to push for changes in her legal team. The judge overseeing the case ultimately ruled that Boone had forfeited her right to a court-appointed attorney after her 8th lawyer withdrew. As a result, Boone was forced to represent herself in court, a decision that complicated the already challenging legal battle ahead. Early on, Boone's defense appeared to focus on portraying the incident as a tragic accident, initially using the narrative of an innocent game that had gone wrong. However, as the case unfolded, her defense strategy shifted to the argument of battered spouse syndrome. Boone's legal team, when she still had representation, suggested that years of domestic violence between her and Torres had driven her actions, though this defense was expected to face significant hurdles in court. The early legal proceedings saw multiple pre-trial hearings and delays as Boone and her legal team tried to navigate the complexities of the case. With the video evidence painting a damning picture of Boone's actions and her inconsistent statements about the events, her attempts to mount a strong defense seemed to face significant obstacles from the outset. All of these elements contributed to a lengthy and drawn-out pre-trial process. As Sarah Boone's legal case progressed, her defense team began to formulate a strategy centered around the battered spouse syndrome defense. This defense argues that Boone's actions were not the result of malice or intent to kill, but rather a reaction to years of domestic abuse at the hands of Jorge Torres Jr. The defense posited that Boone was the victim of long-term emotional and physical abuse, and that this abuse contributed to the tragic events that led to Torres's death. By framing Boone as a victim, her attorneys hoped to present her actions in a more sympathetic light, potentially reducing her culpability in the eyes of the court. The battered spouse syndrome defense is legally recognized in many states, including Florida, where Boone is facing trial. To successfully argue this defense, however, Boone's legal team would need to prove that the abuse she endured was persistent, escalating, and that it impacted her mental state at the time of the incident. There is some evidence to suggest that their relationship was indeed tumultuous. Torres had been arrested multiple times for domestic violence against Boone, and Boone herself had been arrested for battery by strangulation during one of their altercations. These documented instances of violence between the couple could lend credibility to the idea that Boone was subjected to a pattern of abuse. However, the viability of this defense is questionable when weighed against the damning video evidence. The recordings on Boone's phone showed her taunting and mocking Torres while he was trapped in the suitcase, ignoring his desperate pleas for help. Her laughter and comments about past incidents, such as choking and infidelity, painted a picture of intentional cruelty rather than self defense or a momentary reaction to abuse. For the battered spouse defense to succeed, Boone would need to convincingly argue that her actions were the result of a psychological response to sustained abuse. Yet, the video evidence undermines this narrative as it reveals Boone's apparent indifference to Torres's suffering. Additionally, there are no visible signs in the evidence that Boone was in immediate danger during the incident, making it difficult to link her actions directly to the battered spouse syndrome. Ultimately, while Boone's legal team may argue that her history of domestic violence played a role in the events of that fateful night, the strength of the video evidence and her inconsistent statements about the incident present significant challenges to the viability of this defense. The Sarah Boone case has garnered widespread media attention since the chilling details of Jorge Torres Jr.'s death came to light. The shocking nature of the crime, particularly the disturbing video evidence, gripped the public, drawing comparisons to other notorious true crime cases. News outlets and social media platforms were flooded with discussions about the circumstances surrounding Torres's death, with many expressing outrage over Boone's actions. The video of Torres begging for help, while Boone laughed and taunted him, was particularly hard for the public to digest. It was seen not just as a cruel act, but as a deeply disturbing representation of the toxic dynamics within their relationship. Public reaction to Boone's defense strategy, which centered around her claims of being a victim of abuse, has been largely skeptical. While some have sympathized with her as a possible victim of domestic violence, the majority of the public opinion has been shaped by the video evidence, which painted her in a negative light. Many felt that the video showed a complete lack of empathy or remorse, which made Boone's claims of victimhood difficult to accept. The graphic nature of the evidence, Torres's desperate pleas for air, and Boone's indifferent response ignited anger and disbelief, with people questioning how someone could exhibit such disregard for another's suffering. The emotional toll on Jorge Torres Jr.'s family, particularly his children, has been profound. Torres was a father of three, and his death left his family devastated. The nature of his death, suffocating inside a suitcase, unable to escape or get help, made the grief even more unbearable for his loved ones. For his children, the loss of their father in such a senseless and cruel manner has undoubtedly been life-altering. His family has had to contend with not only the pain of his passing, but also the traumatic way in which his final moments were documented and shared in the courtroom. The trial has been particularly grueling for Torres's family. They have had to endure the painful process of hearing about the details of his death and witnessing Boone's defense claims, which for them seemed to downplay the severity of what had happened. The public exposure of the videos in which Torres is heard pleading for his life added another layer of trauma for those close to him. His family has expressed their desire for justice, wanting the truth of what happened to be fully acknowledged in court. The pre-trial phase of Boone's case has been marked by a series of delays and legal complications. Boone's frequent attorney changes became a significant obstacle in moving the case forward. Over the course of the legal process, she went through 8 different attorneys, each of whom withdrew for various reasons, ranging from conflicts of interest to Boone's own dissatisfaction with their defense strategies. At one point, the judge ruled that Boone had forfeited her right to a court-appointed attorney, leading to the extraordinary situation of her representing herself. These complications slowed down the legal proceedings, as Boone's lack of consistent representation made it difficult to maintain continuity in her defense. There were numerous pre-trial hearings where Boone struggled to navigate the complexities of the legal system on her own. She attempted to argue her case and defend her actions, but her shifting narrative and lack of legal experience complicated her defense strategy. The delays were frustrating not only for Boone, but for Torres's family, who were eager for justice to be served. With each pre-trial hearing, the case became more tangled in procedural issues, pushing back the timeline for the actual trial. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in the case against Boone, with the most damning piece being the videos found on her phone. The forensic examination of Torres's body revealed that he died from asphyxiation, consistent with being confined in the suitcase for a prolonged period. The bruising found on Torres's body suggested that he had struggled inside the suitcase, further supporting the prosecution's argument that he was trapped for an extended amount of time and unable to escape. The videos captured on Boone's phone were the most critical forensic evidence. In these recordings, Torres is seen pleading for help and Boone is heard mocking him. Forensic analysis of the videos confirmed their authenticity and timestamped them, showing that Boone had filmed Torres during the night, contradicting her claim that she was unaware of his distress. This evidence, combined with the autopsy results, formed the backbone of the prosecution's case, painting Boone's actions as intentional and malicious rather than accidental. Given the strength of the video evidence and the forensic findings, the prosecution's case against Boone is substantial. The videos alone are powerful enough to sway a jury as they show her indifference to Torres's suffering and undermine her defense that his death was a tragic accident. Boone's shifting stories and attempts to blame alcohol further weaken her credibility in court. However, Boone's legal team may still argue that her actions were influenced by years of domestic violence using the battered spouse syndrome defense. If the defense can successfully demonstrate that Boone was a victim of long-term abuse and that her mental state was affected by this trauma, they may be able to reduce the charges or secure a lesser sentence. Still, the video evidence remains a significant hurdle for her defense, and it is likely to have a strong influence on the jury's decision. The most likely outcome, based on the available evidence, is that Boone will be convicted of second-degree murder given the cruelty and negligence captured in the videos. However, the final verdict will depend on how effectively the defense can argue Boone's mental state and the role that domestic abuse may have played in her actions. The case of Sarah Boone and Jorge Torres Jr. is a tragic and complex story that reflects the devastating impact of toxic relationships. What started as a seemingly playful interaction turned into a horrifying death, one that has left a permanent scar on Torres's family and the broader community. The videos, which show Boone's callousness toward Torres's suffering, have become the defining element of the case, underscoring the chilling dynamics between the couple. At its core, this case highlights the dangers of unresolved domestic conflict and the potentially lethal consequences of emotional and physical abuse. Boone's defense of being a battered spouse, while plausible given their history, is overshadowed by the cruelty displayed in the video footage. The case serves as a reminder of the importance of addressing abusive relationships before they escalate into irreversible tragedies. As the trial progresses, it will force both the court and the public to reckon with the difficult questions of accountability, justice, and the complexities of abusive relationships.